All right, welcome back. We sometimes here on the show take a listener question and we want one from you. Whatever it is that you have a question about, maybe it's something in the Bible you don't understand, or maybe it's a decision you're having trouble making, or a situation in your workplace or your family or your relationship, whatever it is. Send it to us at questions@russellmoore.com. Extra points if you send it in a voice memo. That's what we prefer, to questions@russellmoore.com. But we have one today, and I think it might be a little bit resonant with our theme for this episode. Leslie, what's the question?
Yeah. So this is about transparency and leadership. And we recently had General Stanley McChrystal on the show to talk about leadership, character. So this listener is asking what to do in a situation in their church when there is no leadership transparency. So they say, what should a church member do when there is no longer transparency of any kind for the future of church schools, charitable programs, mission programs, building programs, etc.? Since we can't vote on expenditures or even see detailed budgets, how do we trust a senior pastor and his team who are not communicating and are not transparent? As stewards, we know we are only returning what God owns to the local storehouse, but are we to ignore cracks in its foundation? Oh, I love how they ask that there at the end.
This is another situation where I'm kind of shackled by the fact that the person is out there in cyberspace and not sitting down with me, because I would want to explore uh, what the person means by transparency, first of all. I mean, when this person says we cannot vote on expenditures, what does that mean? Does that mean that you, as a congregation, there's no method of accountability for what's budgeted, or uh, does that mean that sometimes what people mean by that is we don't have any sort of direct control over the ongoing expenditure. So it's fair to say we ought to have accountability for how much we're spending on office supplies. Okay, that's that general category. That's fair. It's not fair to say we need to, as a congregation, make decisions within that budget on whether or not to buy a printer. That's not a lack of transparency. That's just that you could not run an effective mission organization that way. If what this person means, though, is that you have expenditures that are happening that are outside of the sight of the congregation, that ought to be within reasonable parameters of accountability, then yeah, that would worry me. And if what this person means is we don't have any control over expenditures, we can't vote on expenditures. What that person means is that the congregation is just saying, just send us your money and don't ask us any questions. That would concern me as well. And so what I would want to do in that situation is first sort of calibrate whether my expectations are reasonable. And what you can do is to look at other similar churches or mission organizations, start to look at whether your congregation is operating within reasonable best practices there. And it may be that what you decide is no, something very different is happening here. Then what I would do is to approach your leadership, whatever the structure is. Maybe you have deacon leadership or elder leadership or a vestry leadership, whatever it is. I would go to people there, but go first with the assumption that they don't realize what they're doing. I mean, I would have that first sort of charitable default to the charitable reading, that you have people who think they're being transparent, but they don't realize they're not being. and to say we as a congregation don't know what's happening with our money and we're accountable before God for it. Can you help us with this? Sometimes you'll have a place they don't know what they're
Yeah, I don't
doing.
realize miscommunication
Yeah, or
or
you have
right.
people sometimes you have people who are really gifted in areas of spiritual leadership who are incompetent in some of these questions of financial leadership, and they don't know that they're incompetent. That's that's not an excuse for it. They should be, or they should know where their limitations are and know how to have people involved who are, but sometimes they don't.
Well, and you've talked before, you've answered a listener question before about the awkwardness of that role that sometimes leadership is forced into to ask for money, ask for
Yeah.
funds to do these capital campaigns. It's not something they're necessarily trained for as spiritual
No,
leaders.
and I think if what you said is rather than first coming at it with you all are a bunch of TV evangelist grifters, and I'm on to you, which may be, it may be, but my first approach would be, hey, do you know that it's really hard for me to give, and I really do think that God wants me to give, but I it's really hard for me to do that because of what seems to me to be a lack of transparency. Have you noticed that? And then look and see how they respond to that. It might be what they say is, we've never had anybody bring that to us before. What could we do? Let's find a way to make that more accountable and more transparent. If what they do, though, is to be offended by that question, now you've got a very different situation, and I would take that very seriously. So if you've got a leadership that's kind of bumbling, they don't know what to do, and they're going to figure out how to get maybe some outside expertise to figure out how to do this better, then I would bear patiently with them as you get there. But if they're offended by the question, then you're aware that that's not what's going on, that there's something much more serious happening here. And what you don't want to do at that point is to say, I'm just going to keep giving to I don't know what, when it is it is almost never the case. And I even hesitate to use the word almost because I've never seen it happen yet, where you have a financially predatory institution that is not also predatory in some other way. If you have a leadership that says to a congregation, you don't need to know what we're doing, it is really rare that you don't have either a kind of enriching of self in a way that's fleecing vulnerable people, or a general attitude that leads to other kinds of predatory behavior. And so I would at that point take that very seriously. So kind of take it's not Matthew 18, but it's sort of a similar kind of process. First question, and then start to ramp it up from there. But what you're seeking, make sure that what you're seeking is genuine accountability, not revenge. You don't do that on the basis of you've got some sort of problem in some other area and it's kind of manifesting itself here. If there's really a problem here with the finances, or you think there might be, don't just stew about it. Take it to the people who actually have the power to do something, and first appeal to them to do it. If they won't, I mean, it's kind of not exactly, but kind of similar to what Jesus says when he's sending his disciples out to the villages. Say, give your greeting to that house, give your peace to that house. If it returns to you, good. If it doesn't, if they will not receive you, shake the dust off your feet and leave. I'm not going to say it that strongly in this situation, but I am going to say try to resolve this peacefully. And if you can't, then you start to say, okay, well, then I can't be a part of this if I'm potentially involved in something wrong with my giving. At that point, you're realizing it, and it's time then to decide: is this a place I can actually be?
Hmm. I love that because I think sometimes there's an illusion of power that can lead to to thinking there's corruption going on instead of just I want to use transparency as a word in this case. In this listener's question, it has some connotations, but sometimes that illusion of power looks like corruption, whereas it's simply just not sharing details that they didn't even realize that people were wanting or that needed to be shared. And so the approach, the posture approach, as thinking looking for the most charitable um, solution or just perhaps miscommunication seems really good, gracious.
And sometimes it's the reverse. I mean, I have seen institutions that where the leadership is talking about support the mission, support our conviction, support all of these things, and you have leaders that are living like landed gentry off of this sort of money in ways that nobody knows about. Nobody has any idea that you've got the leadership that's doing what Deuteronomy 17 warns about: kings piling up for themselves horses and treasures. And in some of the situations, you have the people who are giving who are not themselves grifters, but they're too trusting that they're not willing to ask those kinds of questions. I saw this not too long ago with question of an institution having 990s, which are uh, sort of public accountability in terms of compensation and those kinds of things. And this institution was saying, well, we can't do that. And they gave a really just a an insulting to the intelligence of their people sort of answer. Now, there are situations where an institution will say, we can't have whatever kind of accountability you're wanting because it would be impossible to do. But this was a case where you're just like, this institution is counting on people being too naive or too trusting to even follow up with a question, or too intimidated sometimes. So you've got to kind of know where you are on that map before you know how to respond.
And I'm thinking of my own church that I grew up in, which the youth group did not want to give the receipts for the pizzas that they would buy, and it turned out there was a whole other scandal that was brewing, but it came down to that trusting. They did not want to relinquish that information, and it was an environment of misuse and abuse, not just of money but of power and of people.
Yeah, and we had the opposite in my church, where the business meetings were so there was such a for some reason the congregation was really trusting and peaceful and able to, until they went into business meeting, and then people just sort of transformed. And I'll never forget being a kid and being there for this long debate over the budget, when there was I think $300 budgeted for pulpit supply, which meant, when the pastor's on vacation, somebody is preaching, and somebody stood up and gave this very passionate speech about how I can't believe that we're spending $300 for those little pencils that go back behind the pulpit. And somebody had to get up and say, that's not what pulpit supply is in this context. Another debate that went on and on over updating the hymnals, because we had these originally sort of well, kind of a purplish color hymnal, but the light that was coming in from the stained glass had faded out the tops of them. So you had kind of a tan line on the hymnals. And there was a debate that went about replacing them. It was voted down, and someone stood up and said, "Well, I make a motion that we flip the hymnals over to tan the other side." And I remember thinking as a kid, I don't think this is exactly a good use of our time together.
That's a problem
as
solver
people,
right there. That's a
right? Yeah. Yeah, he was. That's a good question. Maybe you've got a question. Send it to us at questions@russellmoore.com. Extra points if you send it in a voice memo so we can hear your voice about anything that you have on your mind, something in the Bible, something in theology, something in the culture around you or your workplace, your relationship, your family, whatever it is. Send it to us, questions@russellmoore.com. We'll do our best to answer.